a little background about myself. So I am a certified in holistic nutrition back in 2013. And I've also been a diabetes prevention program coach for the past 4 years. So I'm happy to be here with you all, getting to talk today about helping to relieve some stress. Okay, so go ahead and get started. So how stress affects us. And I think, right, if you're looking at or feeling how you feel when you're stressed, you may notice things like increased heart rate, right, increased blood pressure, and right, nervousness, some anxiety. So everyone can have a variety of different symptoms of how stress affects them. So this kind of breaks it down into how stress affects your body internally, right? Because we all know how it affects us on the external, right? How it shows up for us. So this is just a deeper dive in. So there's 2 different parts of our nervous system, and one is the parasympathetic nervous system. So when we're calm, we're in the parasympathetic nervous system, and our body has the time to do the maintenance and repair that it wants to be doing. And then the sympathetic nervous system, also very necessary, is when we are in that fight or flight mode and the adrenaline kicks in, right? And that's where the heart rate increases. And so an example of this, how easily we can move between the two. If you've ever gone to the doctor and they're taking your blood pressure, right, in the beginning, and sometimes they'll say, take a couple of deep breaths, right, and then we'll test it again. And oftentimes, if you take a couple of those deep breaths, they retest, and the numbers will come down. And so that's a really interesting way to show essentially how your body is moving between these 2 nervous systems. And you're in that sympathetic nervous system, maybe because you were running late, you were running up the stairs, you don't like going to the doctor's office, you're worried about something else, whatever it is, and your blood pressure was raised. And then giving your body that time to take those couple of deep breaths actually lets it know that it's safe. And it moves into the parasympathetic nervous system, and it starts to lower your blood pressure pretty immediately. So I think that's an interesting real life example, because we're talking about the internal, right? What's going on internal, but we got to see really how it can affect us so quickly. So I'll just ask, does anyone have any questions about that? You can either unmute yourself or ask in the chat box. Okay, I'm going to keep going, but yeah, if you think of any questions, you can put them into the chat box. So this is looking at how stress affects our food choices, right? So we see how it affects our body, right? And how it can change so quickly. And so this, looking at how it affects our food choices, and you may get to see some of this, in day to day, right? When we have acute stress, oftentimes we actually, our appetite is suppressed. But then with chronic stress, which is causing cortisol to be released and increased, it actually increases appetite. And so that's one way that stress affects our food choices, because we are programmed to want more food, whether or not we're hungry for it. And then the other part of it is, so that's the quantity part of it. And then the other part is looking at our bodies wanting, what kind of food our body's wanting, right? And so oftentimes we go towards that comfort food, right? And so comfort foods oftentimes, I mean, they're going to look different for everybody, but oftentimes can be those more rich, high fat foods, sugar foods, quick carbohydrates, right? Like desserts or bread or something like that. And so that's also, our body is programmed to want that. So it's been shown that those foods actually help dampen that stress response. And also the sugar helps with the adrenaline. Like if you're in that fight or flight mode, your body wants extra sugar, the glucose, to give your body the energy to be in that mode. So getting to see, right, how stress affects the quantity, but also the quality of the food that we want when we're in that stressed stage. And of course it of course depends from person to person, and also acute stress versus chronic stress. And right, so acute stress is going to be more of a situation when like running late, right? Or you can have increased blood pressure, heart rate, right? If you have to be somewhere on time and you're running late, and then you get there, right? And then the situation kind of, it ends, and then your blood pressure comes back down. And so chronic stress is more about day-to-day stress that in our lives that doesn't really go away, or if there's long periods of stress, that's not just a short-term situation. So I'm going to pause there for a second. Does anyone have any questions about that? How stress affects our food choices? Okay, so I'm going to keep going then. So one of the ways to help, well, I'd say there's a lot of different ways to help with that, help to lower the chronic stress. And so that's more of our day-to-day stress. And we so often live in that part of the nervous system, in the sympathetic nervous system. And so to help our body get back into the parasympathetic nervous system in our day-to-day lives, I'm going to go here, we can bring in some activities that help calm down the nervous system. So one, like I mentioned with the deep breathing in the doctor's office, that's a really simple way to show, right, how breathing alone, deep breathing, helps to let your body know that it's safe. Going back to the idea of like hunters and gatherers, when you're being chased by a lion, and then the lion, so you're tensed and you're running, and your heart rate is up, and then when the threat is gone, the blood pressure comes down, right? And so when you're able to take deep breaths, the body is able to know that it's safe. So that's why the deep breathing is so important. And so thinking about, these are examples of different activities that can also help bring you into that place, right, where it's naturally calming. That's also going to let your body know that it's safe, that it can move into the parasympathetic nervous system. And so this is an example, just some ideas to get going with, what do you enjoy doing, right, that's calming? And so oftentimes there's the difference between, say, the calming and grounding activities, like these that you'll see here on this list, and activities like electronics, right? TV, Netflix, any kind of electronics where it's kind of taking the time away, but we're not being calmed necessarily. Some of them, sure, maybe. But I like to just give you that difference of calming versus taking time up. And so here's just a little an example list. So, reading, if you enjoy reading, having a favorite book or magazine or whatever it is out. I know sometimes you'll also be, right, you may be reading on electronics. So, just adapting to whatever works for you. Writing, journaling, being in nature, again, whatever that looks like for you, you know, if you have a backyard area, you can go sit in. If you're walking down the street, even if there's, you know, a tree or some flowers, whatever it is, right? If you can't get out into nature, there's always something around us if we look for it. And so being in nature, being in the sun can be really helpful and calming. Of course, talking to a friend, talking to a loved one, right? Having that social support. And there's so meditating and breathing, two different things, but in the same kind of category, right? When you're meditating, you're really getting into the calm, and guided meditation also, but you're getting into that calm state. And just to also, if for those of you who have gone through the session about stress, right? Some of these might pop up as examples from that session also. And if you're in the beginning of the program, then that will be coming up shortly for you. And so let's see, continue on here. Doing a puzzle. I think a lot of that's come up a lot more, I know, with especially being in the shelter in place. I feel like a lot of people are bringing out puzzles, right? Getting creative, bringing out games, things that maybe we don't normally have time for. So things like that, right? That sometimes we forget about. So put that on there. Puzzles can be really stress relieving. Any kind of physical activity, right, can really help. Again, going for that walk, and, you know, or anything that you enjoy doing. And that's where I'd say you want to make sure that you enjoy the activity, not that you're, you know, making yourself go do some kind of exercise to get out, right? Where it's like really enjoying what you are doing for your physical activity, because that's part of the calming experience. And then say music, right? Whatever that means for you, listening to music, dancing. There's so many different ways that we can use music to help us feel calmer. Photography, I put on here. I've had that brought up a couple of times, where sometimes people actually do photography. Other times just with your phone, right? Can be a way to be in the moment and, you know, taking that, you know, finding that piece of nature around you, taking photography, you know, taking photos, just a way to, help you bring you into the moment, even if photography isn't necessarily like a hobby of yours or a profession, right? And so continuing on coloring, there's all the you know, the adult coloring books. I'd also say in here goes, you know, drawing, painting, but even if you aren't necessarily the artistic type, right? Coloring can be really soothing, say calming. And mindful eating, for those of you who are on our webinar before, we talked about mindful eating. And so that's also one of the things that's going to help calm the system, right? If you're really paying attention to the food that you're having, paying attention to those five senses. So I like to add that in, because stress so often is associated with eating, right? Then we go to eat to help calm the stress. And so if we're doing the mindful eating, you're helping to address both of those. If you are going to eat, you know, because you're feeling stressed, get out a piece of fruit, do some mindful eating, paying attention to the five senses. And then lastly, your favorite hobby, right? Because these are just examples. And so it's really about what's calming to you, right? It's going to be different for everyone. So I want to give you all a couple minutes to think about what you would write on your own list. I think it's really helpful having these lists somewhere where you can see them, right? Whether if that means having it on, you know, on a computer, that works. Oftentimes for a lot of people that gets lost, right? And then paper get lost for other people. So depending what works for you, but somewhere where you'll see it, not just, you know, making a list and putting it away. I like to recommend putting it on your fridge. It kind of helps you stop, right? And come back into the present moment, as opposed to just opening up the fridge and, you know, taking a look at what's there without even paying attention to if you're hungry or if you have a craving or what's going on about why you're going towards the fridge. And it can be really helpful, right, to see a list of activities that you actually enjoy doing. Right? It's not a to-do list. I put that on there, right? It's also not activities that you think you should do or that would be good if you do, or if somebody else, you know, told you to do them. So activities that you actually enjoy doing, you know, maybe you do want to try something new, but you want all of those activities to be something that you enjoy, so that when you see that, say on your fridge, right, it does make you pause, say, oh, I could, you know, go and sit outside with my favorite book. Or, you know, there's the puzzle on the table, I could go do that. So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes and think those through and start creating a list. Of course, you can always add to it, right, as you go. So I'll give you a couple of minutes to start writing down some activities. And I'll put this one back up here to give you some ideas to start with.